everybody has a film to call a favourite of their very own. One of mine is Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal. I have always been captivated by the world of the Dark Crystal ever since my first viewing, and it was from Dark Crystal that I knew that puppetry was my second preferred art form after animation. The imagined world of Thra conceived by the combined imaginative talents of Brian Frode and Jim Henson is one of the most vastly different yet engaging alien landscapes and creatures that has graced us on the big screen. And while I do indeed love the Dark Crystal, it's not without its faults. After all, it can be really, really boring. There are shots that linger for too long and very little character interaction. There was 3 or 4 main characters? And if Jim hadn't been given the feedback in the initial test screening, the Skeksis would have lost half their charm by just using their intended ancient Egyptian language to communicate instead of English, thus losing nearly the now infamous phrases and mutterings that have made the Skeksis of the Dark Crystal a big cult favourite.
I hate your whimper.
However, the new 10 episodic series for Netflix fixes the problems that I had with the film, and it brought new ideas and concepts to the table, and although it's not without faults of its own. So join me, the Blue Artisan, as I review The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. Sorry, I couldn't use the official music, in case of copyright stuff. So firstly, spoilers for any of those who have not seen the full series yet. So when I hopped on to Netflix to watch Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, I was pleasantly surprised by the length of episodes presented to us by Netflix. I was expecting only at least 20 minutes per episode, but no, each episode nearly goes on for a full hour. I was assuming that it would just be 20 minutes maximum per episode, but no, what we got was a lengthy 40 to 50 minute time frame. And then I had my doubts, as I was worried that due to the lengthy time frame, the series would start to lose its quality and decline as it progressed. I'm pleased as punch to say that it did not. The quality writing and presentation of each episode was as good and at times even better than the last. Dark Crystal Age of Resistance plays out as a prequel series just before Jen's great journey to heal the crystal, where it's set in the Before Age, where we're shown how the Skeksis ruled and dominated Thra, and how the downfall of the Gelfling all began. We return to Thra, the fantasy world dreamt up by the conjoined imaginative efforts of Jim Henson and Brian Frode, and let's face it, again, as flawed as the Dark Crystal movie is, the Dark Crystal world is what we're all dying to see more of. The planet of Dark Crystal is called Thra, and Thra is Earth-like, yet un-Earth-like too. And as contradictory as that statement may sound, when you see Thra in all of its glory, both in the original film and the new series, it's a world you want to swim in and get lost in, as it showcases new life in a new world, away from our own. Yet it's this organic and alien-like world with its beasts that warrant caution, from its wide array of deadly fantasy beasts to its carnivorous yet beautiful fauna. And when the trailer dropped for the Age of Resistance, I was not disappointed. I was giddy with anticipation to return to Thra and see what happened before the events of the movie. And after viewing the trailer for Age of Resistance multiple times, as that's how excited I was for this series, I felt like I'd seen everything that Age of Resistance had to offer. Boy was I wrong, there was a wealth of material from this series, and due to the great length of episodes, while some may argue went on for too long, I myself found them the perfect amount of viewing time. And straight away from episode 1, you can tell the difference in direction clearly from Jim's vision to what we the audience would have wanted more of. Lore about the world of the Dark Crystal, as well as exposition and character interaction. There's an excellent homage from Sigourney Weaver's opening introduction that's set in similar vein to the scene that Joseph O'Connor painted in the original movie.
Another world, another time, another age.
Another world, another time, in the age of wonder.
And then an almost like-for-like opening crystal ritual that introduces us to the Skeksis, and when you see them back on the screen again, it's like meeting old friends. Okay, albeit evil, sick and twisted old friends, but still you get the gist of what I'm saying here. And there is actual dialogue between the Skeksis, We can see the creatures communicating and talking to one another in more than a mere few sentences and quips, establishing who they are, and what they're doing. The original Dark Crystal was utterly almost devoid of character interaction and dialogue, and was quite restricted with its discussions between characters, which is probably why when we see the introduction of Olgra with her charismatic personality and abundance of dialect, we actually get someone on screen who can talk.
Now, ask what the Great Conjunction is. What's the Great Conjunction? The Great Conjunction is the end of the world! Or the beginning?
I have to admit, the reintroduction to the Skeksis is utterly fantastic. It's a true delight seeing these beautiful sinful creatures back on our screens again. And just what wonderful performers and voice actors they got to bring the Skeksis back to twisted life again. Why, I can recognise my old childhood puppeteer favourite, Don Austin, voicing the Scholar Skeksis, and hot dang does he do an utterly 10 out of 10 performance. If you didn't know who he was Bingo from the Basil Brush Show, for one example. Well, I'll go more in detail about the actors later, but for now, getting back to the series. Now, one review I did read about the series before I watched it was the fact that the Skeksis steal the show in every scene they're in. That's understandable, because in the original movie they stole the scenes too. They're the most entertaining and the most visually interesting part of the original movie. And I have to agree with that statement. The Skeksis do steal every scene they're in, and it's glorious to watch. As later on you're introduced to the Gelflings, you can't help but think, gee, I wish we could go back to the Skeksis, or I wonder what the Skeksis are up to. Or when another Skeksis scene does come up, you're like, yay, more Skeksis! The first episode was a little boring at times, but you'd expect that though, as it has to set the scene and build everything up for the next 9 episodes. And while we're introduced to the new main characters like Rian and his Gelfling girlfriend, watching this short and sweet romance blossom, it was a little contrived and cliched, albeit a little rushed. It would snowball the events that would begin the Age of Resistance. So that's a plus. The final scene in episode 1 certainly is childhood trauma door worthy though. You do grow to like the Gelflings more throughout each episode, but yeah, the Skeksis really take the show by storm. And how could they not? They got some pretty good actors voicing the Skeksis. I mean, Simon Pegg, who I kid you not, was a pitch-perfect performance to his original Chamberlain counterpart, Barry Dennen. He's so good at invoking Dennon's presence through the Chamberlain that it was difficult to see the difference between Pegg and Dennen. Bravo, Simon Pegg, bravo. Speaking of pitch-perfect performances, not only does Simon Pegg perfectly invoke the spirit of Barry Dennen, but another actress who performs another scene-stealing character, the ever-enigmatic and charismatic Olgra, performed by Donna Kimball, who I honestly couldn't tell the difference between her and her original actress, Billie Whitehall. She was that good. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, any scene with Olgra or the Skeksis, or just the two together, is just absolutely magnificent and visually engaging. You want to see more of them, that's how good they are on screen. One of the newest additions to the Skeksis troupe that I also adored was the ugly collector Skeksis, Skeklag, whose prominent and bulging and not forgetting to mention oozing pus-filled warts was so hideously wonderful. I enjoyed how they were not afraid to use gunk and goo on the puppets, allowing for dirty, gooey liquids to help bring the disgusting visage of rottenness of Skeklag to life. She's utterly repulsive and gross, and that's what I like to see. Her actress was a fantastic addition to the Dark Crystal crew. Nora Lum, or Aquafina, as she likes to be known, was such a perfect actress for the role, and I really enjoyed her acting. She made Skeklag her own. But that's not to say the other voice actors weren't as good. I mean, Mark Hamill did an utterly fantastic job as a scientist, which, really, would any of us doubt that Mark Hamill would give us a subpar performance? The guy's an expert at doing creepy, chaotic, over-the-top bad guys. And the scientist was one such fine example of Mark Hamill's talents. The Heretic Skeksis, while a recycled idea, is also a new addition and was performed by Andy Samberg, who was so good at his role that I swear he could easily be a contender for an original Muppet performer with his wonderful vocal talents. And not only was he great, but his Urso counterpart, voiced by Bill Harder, was just as phenomenally good too. The two made for a great duo, especially in episode 7, which is a great example of how well they work together. And as a matter of fact, episode 7 is my favourite episode of the lot. Along with a great vocal cast, with puppets you also need physical actors too, and the performers they got were true experts in their field of puppetry. My jaw dropped when I found out that David Chapman was the performer of Emperor Skeksis, and if you don't know, David Chapman is a legend in the puppeteering world. Well, he is to me. He is the puppet master for BB-8 in Star Wars, but you might remember him as the next door neighbour's cat from Dick and Dom in The Bungalow. But more importantly, he was my hero, Otis the Aardvark for CBBC back in the 90s. Oh man, what a legend. Okay, so I've talked in great detail about the Skeksis, let's get on to the Gelflings. Well, as great as it is seeing their Gelfling society and all the different interactions as well as the many different tribes and clans, I did find them a little bit boring at times. But I did enjoy watching Gelfling society play out throughout each episode. While the Gelflings weren't initially captivating as the Skeksis, as I found myself pining for the Skeksis more, they did do a lovely job in building the Gelfling society. In fact, I found it difficult to align myself with a particular clan to call my favourite, because each clan had its own different flavour, and whilst I liked the Vapra clan, I also really liked the exotic desert-dwelling Gelflings, and then I found myself bouncing to the Groton clan of Gelflings, where I just really liked their society, how they were all underground and had their own little world and considered outcast by other Gelflings because they were dirty and lived underground, and their old Mordred is probably one of the funniest Gelflings around. In fact, she's on par with Olgra in how good she is. The Vapra Gelfling were okay too, in particular the Library Gelfling is one that took my fancy, but also as well the little background character Gelfling that liked to dress up in fancy dress. She was a real cute background character that really fleshed out the world of the Gelflings. And while I like Gelfling Ryan and Bria as well, they are your typical fantasy characters. However, the real character I thought should have been the main hero of the story, more than Ryan, and didn't even speak English, was Hup, the Podling. He was emotive and funny, brave, and learned and grew from his travels with Deet. His tenacity and courage developed throughout each episode, and he learnt from all his lessons. He could easily become the main character himself. He was another great scene stealer, and a particular fan favourite of the Age of Resistance. So you may be one of those people saying, why bother watching this when you know all the Gelfling are going to die by the end anyway? Well, what's so good about Age of Resistance is not only do you get to revisit the wonderful world of Thra, but we get to see how the Skeksis used the rest of Thra's creatures and enslaved everyone for their own gains. I personally like the way they use the beetles for car. A very clever yet cruel way of travelling for the Skeksis to get around. It makes you feel for the creatures of Thra having to endure the Skeksis' cruel reign, and you get to see how the Skeksis manipulated everyone to get what they wanted. Dark Crystal Age of Resistance offers some wonderful homages to the original, with plenty of offerings of lavish dinner scenes that were akin to the original. Whilst yet at the same time it also brings something new to the table. One of my favourite new scenes is in fact the bath scene, and if you've seen that, then you know why it's just so good. And while yes, there are plenty of lavish dinner scenes that mirror the original, there's also homages to the Labyrinth as well. The little nod to the Labyrinth by the way the Ascendancy speaks to the Skeksis was very clever. I really enjoyed that. And the original Dark Crystal movie also offered a lot of childhood traumas for a lot of people. And Age of Resistance will also offer some brand new childhood traumas that people want to put behind their own childhood trauma door, as there's some very dark and sinister undertones that really make you want to look away from the screen. Even watching Skeksis turn against Skeksis was a pretty harrowing experience. Now, my faults are pretty minor for this series. After all, they can always improve for season 2. The biggest thing I enjoyed in the original film was how when the Skeksis drank the essence of the Gelflings, you can really see the physical difference that the essence makes on the Skeksis. Their skin getting smoother and all the wrinkles are going. But in this series you don't see any physical changes. You just have to imagine these effects as they shout about how much stronger the Skeksis feel now. The music was great, and while as emotional and well scored the soundtrack is for Age of Resistance, it would have been nice to have a few more notes that felt similar to the classic Dark Crystal theme. You know, the bwah 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 one. They could have incorporated the main theme from the film into the new soundtrack. Age of Resistance showed me something that I never knew I missed so much, and that was a good old-fashioned puppetry performance from the Hneosn company. Sure, you can argue that Disney are doing a fine job with the Muppets, but they're not though. Look at the Muppets now and compare them to how they were in the 70s. See how wild and zany they were to what Disney have done to them now. They're tame. The Muppets no longer cause anarchy whenever they perform. The funness has just gone, and I don't think Disney know how to use the Muppets anymore. And then you watch Age of Resistance and you get pure unadulterated Jim Henson puppetry masterfully performed on your screen. They were not afraid to get these expensive and elaborate puppets dirty or wet. They just really knew how to use them, throw them into the environment and get the best they can out of each puppet. They got dirty, they got wet, they were just used so well in every scene that it just helped make the world of Thra feel more alive and real, like you're interacting with it. It made Thra feel like a living, breathing planet, which is why we all love the world of the Dark Crystal so much, because it is that. It's an Earth like our Earth, yet unknown. And you just don't get that with Disney's Muppets. They're afraid to take those kind of risks with the characters, treating them really delicately. Disney, if you're watching this, take notes on how the Jim Henson Company uses puppets. These guys know how it's done. In fact, this series is so good and done in such a way that it handles its original source material with such great respect that I'd be all for them remaking the Dark Crystal with all these new sets and puppets and casts. I mean, Age of Resistance fixes the problems that I had with the original movie, and it's a loving testament as to why we love the world of the Dark Crystal so much. I could happily give this series, despite the minor nitpicks I have with it, a big fat 10 out of 10, due to how well it encapsulated the sort of vision that Jim Henson was looking for. I'm now eagerly awaiting news from Netflix to say that Season 2 is underway.
This is the voice of the heart of the Crystal of Truth, and it tells you to subscribe today.
No, it's just me being silly. If you enjoyed my ramblings on today's video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you've also seen Dark Crystal Age of Resistance and have thoughts of your own about how this series should have gone, or any nitpicks of your own, then please leave a comment down below and let's have a discussion about it. Until next time, I'll see you all in the next video. Ta-ra!